et lingua eius loquitur judici. Lex Deus in condemnatius. Non volare in magnantibus, neque venare dise facientes iniquitatis. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in secula saeculorum. Amen. O Señor, benedicta obitur sapientiae, et lingua eius loquitur judici. Lex Deus in condemnatius. Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison. At the end of a month in the novitiate of La Trappe, during the summer vacation, that is a time of living in community to experience the life, the novice master gave me this book, which has stayed ever with me, and it is something which was very inspiring there when one had come to the source, la source de la réforme, because that's where the reform of the reform took place. L'Abbé de Rancé had found La Trappe in a deplorable state. He had been touched by grace and had taken very seriously the fact that he was abbot of this house, even though he had never visited it until he had that touch of grace. He was therefore going to take it very seriously. The result was, through divine providence, the complete reform of the Cistercian order in the form of a new order. For under Leo XIII, the various reforms, for there were three essentially, La Trappe itself, there was Sept-fonts, and also the monasteries, were made into the present Cistercians of the strict observance. He did something rather similar with the Franciscans. He made the present system of three main families of Franciscans at that time. But the old Cistercians, of course, carried on, and indeed we have fine examples like Heiligenkreuz. Heiligenkreuz in Austria is a monastery which has a continuous history going back to its foundations fairly early on in the Cistercian period. that of course would have been the family of La Trappe, until eventually things were adjusted and it became a separate observance altogether. Now, in the years following the council, there had been this impetus within the reform to make it more accessible to people who would not be classed as choir monks and lay brothers, the old conversi. And that was part of the reason for the modernizing of the liturgy. One enters henceforth as a monk. A certain proportion may or may not be ordained, but essentially the vocation to the monk is complete, and there was no wish for a two-tier system. That was the thinking behind many of the changes. But they had kept the essence of the life there in 1974. In fact, it was in 1971 that I was very, very moved by a sermon one Saturday evening at the anticipated Sunday Mass, which had already come into France in 1971, in the church of Sainte Jeanne d'Arc, Joan of Arc, in Rouen, where I was staying for a month. And the priest just started off his homily with this: "Follow me down the N2, turn down to L'Aigle and go down the drive and you will find yourself at La Trappe." And he just shared for about a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, his experience of the retreat he had just made at La Trappe. And that powerful sermon stayed with me for those years. Hence it was that I wrote, while a student, to make an experience of the life within for a month in student days. And it was the natural transmission of something ancient, yet vivified prudently. One felt the continuity with the past. For instance, the only portrait we have of l'Abbé de Rancé was one done rather surreptitiously by stealth. It was someone who didn't hear very well, or that was the excuse given, and he was invited to be able to come close to the abbot, to hear what he had to say. And therefore he found his way close to him, and he had already, or at the end, he made this picture with one round circle with nothing in it. That is, the habit was there and the hood was there and there was a place for the head, the face. And so he was able, while listening to the abbot talking, to make this design and then eventually to paint upon it. And we have the only picture that we have. But in La Trappe, as well as having such living relics of the past, because that was in the present chapter house, or rather the scriptorium, we had also the world expert on the spirituality of Rancé. It was eventually the prior, not the abbot, the prior, Don Lucien, who was also my confessor, who had entered at 19 under the old regime, therefore, as all the fathers had, and he had studied all the works of this author, and he would be able to give us conferences of a certain oomph, a powerful tonality of transmission, because he believed in it, and he would come out with things like this: "C'est un corps de doctrine." It is a corpus of doctrine, qui se tient, which holds itself together. It holds itself together, and he would even be able, in that global context, to raise the question of the permissibility or not of having what we had once a year for the community, or the novitiate, which is a big novitiate, able to produce some kind of divertissement, some kind of hilarity for the brethren, a play or something. It was on the brink because it meant a certain amount of talking, and that was the bottom line, that at La Trappe one did not hear the human voice. We were still taught the signs. There was a weekly class, and I found that, of course, still there when I returned in 1984. The weekly class was still there of signs. One was avoiding to make that element of the invasiveness of the voice to be heard in the cloister, because silence is a common commodity and one does not just treat it as a private affair. It involves one's brethren, because in the Trappist life there is no physical solitude. It is all done in common. hence it is that this was the spirituality that we received, and one felt that was un bien de famille, because when a monk would die, that same Don Lucien would come out with things like this in chapter. Frère Marie, he said, allez à la grande trappe. He's gone to the great trappe, that is la majeure partie, the great majority are on the other side, because it was a huge family which had gone on without a break. It had got to go into exile, and hence it is that the Trappist reform spread also into different countries. It went different parts of Europe, it went into Laval Sainte in Switzerland, it went around during the periods of turbulence, political turbulence in France, but of course eventually it went over to the States. Le Melleray founded New Melleray, and we also had the foundation of Mount Melleray in Ireland, from which came Mount St. Bernard, and from Mount Melleray other houses of course came. Roscrea, Bethlehem in the north of Ireland, houses outside came through Mount St. Bernard and Mount Melleray outside Europe altogether. And so the family has gone on as it had done in the early periods under St. Bernard, when he was a great founding abbot himself. He was the first abbot of Clairvaux. And from there, of course, came the initial impetus to Waverley in the south of England, to Hendy-Gwynedd in Wales, Whitby, and to nearby Mellifont, just nearby here in Ireland. And from these, of course, others would come, and that's called Monastery Mor. The Monastery Mor, the big monastery, it's called in Irish here, the first Cistercian monastery, which took the place then of the old Catholic monasteries like Monaster Bois, because they were eclipsed after this huge, powerful movement from the continent. Now, this is something which, as I say, holds together as a block of spirituality. Now, in the period subsequent to this, there was considerable tension. Apparently, what caused it in part was the way in which the French were fairly keen on maintaining the ethos which they had received, because France is an idealistic country. And we know that the powerful Cistercian movement was still, and still is, important in Ireland. There were 17, I believe, male houses and 13 female ones when I was in France. They have closed one in Les Dombes has been closed since. But having said that, the non-reformed Cistercians from Les Reims founded Sénongue, so there's still a large number. Anyway, all that to say, it was a huge, powerful bloc in France, but then the other impetus coming from the States, where there was a more open feeling on certain things, was causing tension. And we know that during the major general chapter in about 1971, after the Vatican Council, when they were having to reapply norms in some way, there was a feeling that it was going to be hard to hold it together. And Don Ignace Gillet, who was the Abbot General at the time, a holy man, went actually to see Paul VI and expressed his hesitation about carrying on because he felt he couldn't hold it together. At least he was explaining his problem to Paul VI, but Paul VI insisted that he stay where he was in office. But Paul VI was aware of the problem, that there was a danger that the hard and fast rule of the Trappist reform was perhaps in danger of being thrown out too quickly, because it was something which had made many hidden saints. And the problem was this: once one starts chipping away at certain things which have been considered important and indeed essential to distinguish a family, a spiritual family, then it's not quite so simple, because one thing leads to another. The big one, of course, or the two big ones, silence and enclosure, were of the essence. And the initial possibility in some communities, each community had to vote on it, but the question of having brief communications was coming in. It was not accepted at La Trappe. But the other one then of enclosure was also a problem, because once one starts to make exceptions, then the identity humanly speaking, is difficult to maintain. Now, what am I saying? The body of doctrine transmitted by l'Abbé de Rancé went in this direction. One was dead to the world. So much so that in his period, if the parents of a monk died, it was told in chapter that the parents of a monk had died, and they were not actually, I understand, told which one, but they were just that way so removed from the world that the world on a personal level did not exist. The age average, that is the lifespan of a monk under l'Abbé de Rancé, was around 5 years. It was so severe. And yet, evidence has it that we know that he was very much loved by his community. There was a huge bonding. They huddled around him spiritually. Now, as time went on, they had l'Abbé Lestrange in the 1800s, who actually made it more severe on certain things. Again, a great man, Augustin Lestrange, who made this reform very clear in its impetus, even in exile from where they were in France. They were in Switzerland, and I believe. And anyway, this was what attracted people. And a great abbot of La Trappe, who actually tried his vocation with the Camaldolese eventually, but Don Etienne would say in chapter words to this effect: plus nous sommes stricts, plus nous aurons des vocations. The stricter we are, the more we will have vocations. And it is true that vocations come to a house which knows what it is about. One sees it right now in France. Actually, right now in France, of all the Cistercian monasteries still there, strangely enough, the most severe and most faithful to the ancient charism is actually Sept-fonts, one of the other leading reforming houses, Sept-fonts. And they have renewed themselves but remain very faithful to the essence of the Trappist life. Now, in the Trappist life lived purely, we have St. Benedict coming through. Why? All is simplified. When no words enter in, the slightest word is heard. It is a modality of existing here on earth, in time and in space, which opens to the maximum all the pores of the soul to the beyond. The voice is consecrated. The vocal cords are consecrated unto praise alone. And therefore, all the plethora of distraction coming from even a small conversation is not there. And only one presence fills the mind. After Holy Communion in the morning, one feels extended over the morning that presence. One is living out the Eucharistic encounter. And because there is no recreation in the timetable, we only exist on the level of the brotherhood, on the mystical level. Joy is given through simple smiles, but it is of a different order, the sharing of the joy of the Lord. Now that is something which is with difficulty understood, hence it is that it is very difficult to protect if the doctrine is not handed on. It works if it's taken seriously. And in general, the risk of the monastic life works if it is taken seriously. If, on the contrary, one wants to be a bit of everything, one ends up being a bit of nothing definable. Domino Deo nostrum, dignum et justum, dignum et justum est cum et salutarum, nos tibi semper et ubique gratiae Surgeon, Domine Sancte Pater Omnipotens Aeterne Deus, in sanctis enim qui Christos et dedicaverum propter regnum caelum, tuam decim providentiam celebrare mirabilem, qua humanam substantiam et ad prime originis revoca sanctitatem, et perducis ad experienda dolum, qui in novo seculo sunt habenda. Et ideo cum sanctis et angelis universis, recordamus in fine dicentes, Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus Dominus Deus Sabaoth, Pleni sunt celi et terra, gloria tua. Hosanna in excelsis, Benedictus qui venit in nomine Domini. Hosanna in excelsis. Simplify. I have a secret herd within this place, beside this little lamp that wards my King. I have gazed long at this, the well-hid face, and sometimes in the dark I would thee sing. For thou art near, my God, and nearer still, as ours, thy mighty hand move toward my head. And in a calmed corner much can fill the empty ear that hears what is not said. 'Tis this, my silent Lord, that thou didst say, deep, deep, where all is known. 'Twas this, thy word, that coming drove full oft a word its way into the long unsaid. I heard, but one small shade of meaning in the dark. Enough, 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 'tis hence to hark.